November 24th, 1944, Northfield, Tinian, and Clayfield, Saipan. The 21st Bomber Command dispatches 111 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses towards the Japanese mainland under Brigadier General Hood Hansel oversees the American Strategic Bombing Force from his headquarters in Guam. Silver. Bombers are transporting 277 tons of bombs aimed at the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Musashino engine plant located on the outskirts of Tokyo. What Japanese fighter pilots will encounter this morning will fundamentally alter their perception of aerial warfare and expose a technological disparity that no level of bravery or resolve can bridge. Captain Tatsuo Yamada adjusts his oxygen mask within the cockpit of his Kawasaki K-61 Hien at Chofu Airfield, situated outside Tokyo. The morning briefing highlighted the importance of intercepting enemy bombers while maintaining a maximum altitude advantage. Intelligence reports suggest that large four-engine bombers are operating from newly acquired bases in the Mariana Islands, flying at unprecedented altitudes. Yamada volunteers for the high-altitude interception mission, which promises challenging combat against an adversary whose capabilities remain largely unknown. His aircraft is equipped with four 12.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons, armaments designed for engagements at conventional altitudes where Japanese fighters have historically excelled. The challenge of altitude arose from Japan's limited experience with American heavy bombers in China. During early 1944, those B-24 Liberators and older B-17 Flying Fortresses operated at altitudes accessible to Japanese fighters, typically between 20,000 and 25,000 feet. Major Tishimeda had formulated specialized climbing tactics based on those experiences, focusing on gaining altitude prior to engagement rather than climbing during combat. A pilot already at altitude held energy advantages that could surpass defensive armament. However, the intelligence reports from this morning indicated that these new bombers were operating at significantly higher altitudes than anything previously encountered. The 21st Bomber Command signifies America's most formidable Pacific strategic deployment since the minor raid of 1942. The operation would ultimately encompass more than 1,000 aircraft deployed from 5 principal airfields situated in Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, featuring pressurized cabins specifically engineered for extreme high-altitude missions over extensive Pacific distances. This design approach was fundamentally different from earlier American bombers. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator utilized unpressurized crew compartments that necessitated the use of heavy flight suits and oxygen masks, which restricted their effective operational ceiling to approximately 25,000 feet. In the B-29, American designers emphasized altitude capability, accepting increased complexity in return for operational safety beyond the reach of enemy interceptors. The pressurization system enabled crews to operate in shirt sleeves at altitudes where crews of unpressurized aircraft would face challenges from cold temperatures and hypoxia. Yamada's formation comprises K-61 high-end aircraft from the 244th century and Nakajima K-44 Shoki interceptors from the 47th century, desperately climbing from various airfields around Tokyo at their maximum sustainable rate. The Japanese pilots noticed contrails forming at extreme altitudes as American formations approach from the southeast. Radar operators at the Chiba Detection Station detect the incoming formation at altitudes ranging from 27,000 to 31,000 feet, adjusting their altitude as they navigate through weather conditions. Ground controllers direct defending fighters towards the threat axis, Yet the climbing interceptors find it difficult to reach even 25,000 feet before the bombers arrive over the target. The technological gap becomes immediately evident as the opposing forces engage for the first time. Yamada pilots an aircraft designed in 1941 for medium-altitude combat against Chinese forces and early Pacific War adversaries. His Kai-61 has a weight of 7,250 pounds, powered by a 1,975 horsepower Kawasaki HR-40 liquid-cooled engine, achieving a maximum speed of 368 16,400 feet. Although specifications indicate a service ceiling of 36,000 feet, actual combat performance significantly deteriorates above 28,000 feet. The engine experiences a significant loss of power in a thin atmosphere, while the control surfaces become increasingly unresponsive. Following combat experience, self-sealing fuel tanks and pilot armor were integrated, which added weight and further diminished altitude performance. The Kai-44 interceptors from the 47th Centi strive to reach the bomber formation, which fluctuates between 27,000 and 30,000 feet in altitude, depending on weather conditions. These fighters, specifically engineered for high-altitude interception with exceptional climb rates, face considerable challenges in the thin atmosphere. Engines overheat while delivering only a fraction of their power at sea level, and pilots struggle with inadequate oxygen systems that were intended for shorter engagements at lower altitudes. The interceptors manage to ascend to 28,000 feet before most begin to stall, still thousands of feet below many of the bombers. Those few fighters that attain sufficient altitude lack the energy for prolonged engagement. Control surfaces respond poorly in the rarefied air, while engines operate beyond their design limits. The B-29s maintain their formation integrity at their operational altitude. Crews operate comfortably in pressurized compartments without the heavy flight suits or cumbersome oxygen masks that hindered previous bomber operations. Captain Robert Morgan leads the Superfortress Dauntless Doy, while navigator Captain Theodore Van Cirk identifies the primary target through the Norden bomb site. The bomber's four Wright 350 engines produce 2,200 horsepower each, sustaining over 300 mph true airspeed at operational altitude despite the thin air. Turbo-superchargers compress the thin atmosphere, preserving engine power where naturally aspirated engines fail. The pressurized compartments are connected by a tunnel over the bomb bays, facilitating crew movement without altitude suits. This design allows for sustained operations at altitudes that were previously unattainable for combat aircraft. The primary fire control system orchestrates defensive armament via analog computers, enabling the simultaneous tracking of multiple targets. While gunners are positioned comfortably, Yamada pushes his K-61 to its absolute limit, with the airspeed indicator barely reaching 180 mph as the fighter struggles in the thin atmosphere nearing 30,000 ft. His pre-war training did not prepare him for combat at such high altitudes. The mission briefing highlighted the importance of attacking from above, using diving passes to conserve energy, yet achieving a position above the bombers proves to be unfeasible. The Japanese doctrine, which was developed against unescorted B-17s and B-24s operating at moderate altitudes, is rendered completely inadequate. The high end can only sustain 30,000 ft for a few seconds before stalling, necessitating a recovery that costs 3,000 ft of altitude. Multiple attempts yield similar outcomes as engine temperature gauges surpass redline limits and oil pressure fluctuates dangerously. Yamada notices bomber contrails passing overhead, with their defensive guns tracking his fighter, but refraining from firing due to the extreme range. The significant altitude difference hinders any meaningful engagement despite the desperate efforts of the Japanese and the early warning of the raid. That morning, only 40 Japanese fighters were able to launch any attacks on the bomber formation, with most achieving merely single-firing passes before losing energy. Machine gun rounds fired during climbing attacks rapidly lose velocity in the thin air, with many falling short of their intended targets. The few fighters that managed to reach an effective firing position lack the energy for sustained engagement, resulting in only brief bursts before stalling away. Anti-aircraft shells detonate thousands of feet below the bombers, despite the maximum elevation settings on the guns. The largest Japanese anti-aircraft weapons are theoretically capable of reaching 30,000 ft, but accuracy at such heights proves virtually impossible. The raid on November 24th signifies the first mass B-29 attack on Tokyo since the symbolic Doolittle raid 31 months prior. The formation continues its trajectory towards the Musashino engine plant of the Nakajima Aircraft Company, which is Japan's most significant facility for aircraft engine production. Chief Bombardier Lieutenant Coleman releases his bombs upon receiving the signal, followed by other aircraft that drop their payloads in a sequence from various altitudes. Due to the powerful jet stream winds encountered at altitudes exceeding 200 millimeters, only 24 aircraft successfully strike the primary target, while others either bomb secondary targets or miss entirely. Nevertheless, the psychological impact is substantial. The bombs descend from an unprecedented height as Japanese fighters circle helplessly below, unable to intercept the attackers. Ground observers witness vapor trails crossing the sky of Tokyo at heights previously deemed unreachable by defending fighters. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka oversees fighter operations from sector control, receiving exasperated reports from interceptor squadrons. Pilots report engine failures, ineffective controls, and an inability to maintain the altitude required for interception. The bombers navigate through Japanese airspace, suffering only one loss due to a ramming attack by a damaged fighter in a desperate act. Defending pilots waste fuel in futile attempts to climb, with most returning to base without ever entering firing range. The technological superiority displayed astonishes both Japanese military leaders and pilots. The 21st Bomber Command completes its inaugural Tokyo mission with minimal damage from defenses, although mechanical issues compel several B-29s to divert or ditch in the Pacific. Japanese fighters claim only one confirmed victory through ramming, while bomber gunners assert the destruction of 5 Japanese fighters. The altitude sanctuary defies every Japanese expectation based on intercepting lower flying bombers originating from bases in China. This operational failure arises from a fundamental misapprehension of American bomber capabilities and the groundbreaking design of the B-29. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda monitors B-29 operations from naval headquarters, expressing increasing concern over the failures of Army fighters. His intelligence reports highlight the unprecedented altitude of the bombers, which significantly surpasses the capabilities of Japanese interceptors. Even the latest Navy fighters are unable to engage effectively at such heights. The strategic implications indicate a need for entirely new aircraft designs or alternative defensive strategies. However, Japan is constrained by time and resources for such advancements. The intelligence shortfall reveals a lack of technical knowledge regarding American pressurization technology and turbo-supercharged engines, innovations that have revolutionized high-altitude operations. Japanese planning had presumed that enemy bombers would operate at conventional altitudes below 25,000 feet. Based on prior experiences, The concept of the B-29's pressurized cabin was poorly understood by imperial military analysts who failed to recognize its implications for combat operations. Previous American bombers operating from bases in China flew at altitudes accessible to Japanese fighters, reinforcing these misconceptions. On December 3rd, 1944, another concentrated B-29 assault on Tokyo occurs, with 86 aircraft targeting the same Musashino plant. The Japanese response evolves based on the experiences of November. Captain Teruhiko Kobayashi of the elite 244th Senti adopts new tactics, positioning his fighters at maximum altitude prior to the bombers' arrival, hoping to dive on them with an energy advantage. However, even from an optimal position, the K-61s cannot reach the altitude of the bombers. The formation includes specially modified interceptors with reduced armor, removed radios, and minimal ammunition to decrease weight. These stripped-down fighters achieve slightly better altitude but still fall short of the effective engagement height. Lieutenant Saburo Hayashi leads a specialized ramming unit known as Hagakuo Tai, composed of volunteer pilots willing to sacrifice themselves. The aircraft units strip away all unnecessary weight, which includes most of the armament and armor protection, carrying only sufficient fuel for one-way missions to reach maximum altitude. The modified K-61 fighters ascend towards the incoming formation with the emergency boost activated, accepting the risk of certain engine damage. The manifold pressure surpasses the manufacturer's limits while the cylinder head temperatures near the failure point. Pilots pre-breathe pure oxygen for 30 minutes prior to takeoff, yet the inadequate oxygen systems still lead to hypoxia symptoms during extreme altitude attempts. Most fighters stall at approximately 30,000 ft, which is still below the effective engagement altitude. Sergeant Masawaki reaches 31,500 ft in his lightened K-61 before attempting a ramming attack against a lagging B-29. The bomber's defensive guns fire continuously as the fighter approaches from below in a zoom climb. Multiple 50 caliber rounds hit the Ki-61, but Itaki remains on his collision course. At the last moment, his fighter loses as energy, stalling 500 ft below the target. Before entering an uncontrollable spin, the pilot regains control at 20,000 ft, but his aircraft is too damaged and lacks fuel to make another climb attempt. The ramming attacks achieve occasional successes when bombers descend due to mechanical issues, but they cannot systematically counter the high-altitude threat. Through December 1944, B-29 losses remain minimal while Japanese cities begin to suffer strategic damage. The defending pilots experience deep frustration, witnessing their homeland being attacked while feeling powerless to intervene effectively. The traditional samurai warrior spirit proves ineffective against the technological barriers that hinder combat engagement. Pilots express feelings of helplessness and shame regarding their inability to protect Japan despite their willingness to sacrifice their lives. Major General Curtis Lame takes command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, scrutinizing the effectiveness of high-altitude daylight raids with his characteristic intensity. Initial missions suffer from low accuracy due to the jet stream winds encountered at bombing altitude, which can sometimes exceed 250 mm. These winds, previously unknown before B-29 operations, propel bombers swiftly across their targets, rendering precise bombing nearly impossible. Navigation becomes challenging as bombs drift several miles away from their intended targets, irrespective of the bombardier's expertise. Cloud cover often obscures targets during the winter months, necessitating radar bombing with limited precision. This combination of factors results in less than 10% of bombs striking their intended targets. Lame faces pressure from Washington to deliver improved results. After evaluating the tactical landscape, he initiates a groundbreaking change in March 1945, directing low-altitude night incendiary strikes against urban centers. This decision revolutionizes the air campaign over Japan. B-29s remove all defensive armament except for tail guns, maximizing their incendiary bomb loads. The reduction in altitude from 30,000 FT to between 5,000 and 9,000 FT resolves the jet stream issue while bringing bombers within the range of Japanese defenses. This tactical adjustment allows Japanese fighters to suddenly reach effective interception altitudes, fundamentally altering the dynamics of combat. On March 9, 1945, Operation Meeting House occurs, marking the catastrophic Tokyo firebombing mission that redefines strategic bombing doctrine. The attacking force of 334 B-29s approaches at altitudes of 5,000 to 9,000 FT, finally within the operational range of all Japanese fighter types. The night conditions and the unforeseen tactical shift initially bewilder Japanese defenses. Lieutenant Yoshio Mitsuyoshi scrambles in his Nakajima Ki 44 from Matsudo Airfield, finally able to attain bomber altitude with ease. However, night combat introduces entirely new challenges. Lacking airborne radar or effective ground control, Japanese fighters find it difficult to identify targets in the darkness. Searchlights illuminate individual bombers, while anti-aircraft guns engage at point-blank range for the first time. Ki-44s and Ki-61s execute urgent solo assaults without radio coordination or support from formations. Mitsuyoshi successfully conducts multiple firing runs against B-29s, noting hits on engine nacelles and fuselages. Several bombers are engulfed in flames and lose altitude, yet the majority continue towards their objectives despite sustaining damage. The Superfortresses exhibit extraordinary resilience, enduring significant punishment while advancing towards their targets. Remote-controlled turrets engage attacking fighters with radar-directed fire in the darkness, demonstrating unexpected effectiveness. Japanese pilots, trained primarily for daytime combat, find it challenging to adapt to night engagement tactics. The incendiary assault generates a firestorm that engulfs 16 square miles of Tokyo, resulting in an estimated 100,000 civilian fatalities, marking the deadliest air raid in history. Japanese fighters assert the destruction of 14 B-29s, the highest loss of the war, yet they are unable to avert catastrophic damage to the capital. The low altitude facilitates interception, but the overwhelming number of bombers, combined with night conditions and a sudden tactical shift, restricts defensive effectiveness. The success of the firebombing operation confirms Lame's risky strategy, establishing a precedent for future raids. This tactical change undermines the development programs for Japanese high-altitude interceptors that had been desperately seeking solutions to altitude challenges. Resources allocated for high-altitude engine development and pressurization research become obsolete overnight. Imperial Navy Lieutenant Sadamu Kumachi pilots the new Mitsubishi J2M Raiden interceptor during B-29 raids over Nagoya. In early 1945, the Raiden's supercharged KS engine allows for a ceiling of 36,000 feet, theoretically adequate for engaging B-29s. However, combat at such extreme altitudes proves nearly unfeasible. Even when fighters can reach the height of the bombers, controls respond sluggishly while the engine generates minimal power despite supercharging. pilots report difficulties in maintaining pursuit trajectories or effectively leading targets in the thin air, even when achieving bomber altitude. Fighters are deficient in performance for effective engagement. The Raiden necessitates precise positioning prior to the arrival of the bombers to attempt even a single firing pass. Pursuing from below becomes unfeasible once the bombers have passed overhead. Numerous pilots encounter failures in their oxygen systems, leading to disorientation or unconsciousness at high altitudes. The rare successful interceptions occur against damaged stragglers descending from formation rather than against healthy bombers operating at altitude. In April 1945, coordinated kamikaze attacks target B-29 formations. As conventional interception continues to prove insufficient, the Japanese military formally establishes special attack units aimed specifically at B-29s. Corporal Koshi Ogawa successfully rams a B-29 named Torchi over Kawasaki on April 12th, resulting in the destruction of both aircraft in the collision. On the same day, one of the most renowned acts of heroism in B-29 operations takes place. Staff Sergeant Henry Irwin is awarded the Medal of Honor after a phosphorus flare detonates prematurely in his aircraft. The explosion severely burns Irwin's face and body, obliterating his nose and blinding him. In spite of his horrific injuries, Irwin manages to carry the flaming device through the bomber to the cockpit window, thereby saving 11 crew members. His sacrifice exemplifies the bravery displayed by both sides despite the technological disparity. Special attack units are formed at various bases, with pilots volunteering for missions that are certain to lead to their deaths against the Silver Bombers. These ramming attacks achieve limited success, destroying perhaps 10 B-29s throughout the war, which is a minuscule percentage of the bomber force. The psychological effect on American crews surpasses the tactical outcomes, as they are aware that enemy pilots will intentionally ram their aircraft. However, even successful ramming attacks do not significantly alter the effectiveness of the bombing campaign. The central fire control system on B-29s proves to be remarkably effective against Japanese fighters, despite having fewer gun positions compared to B-17s. Computer-controlled turrets are capable of tracking multiple targets at the same time, while gunners operate from pressurized compartments instead of exposed positions. Japanese pilots have reported an unprecedented level of accuracy in defensive fire, with the automated system maintaining its tracking ability even during evasive maneuvers. The remote control system enables continued operation even when individual gun positions sustain battle damage. In contrast to earlier bombers, where gunner casualties would leave defenseless arcs, this technological advancement enhances the altitude sanctuary when bombers operate at their maximum ceiling. The arrival of P-51 Mustang escorts from Uema in April 1945 significantly alters the tactical landscape. These long-range fighters establish air superiority over Japan, thereby making daylight B-29 operations considerably safer. Japanese interceptors are now faced with the challenge of contending with aggressive escort fighters while attempting to engage the bombers. The few fighters that manage to penetrate the escort screen find themselves pursued while trying to position for bomber attacks. Captain Yasuhiko Kuro commands the 64th Sentai, which is equipped with the new Nakajima Ki 84 Hayate fighters, Japan's most advanced operational fighter. The Ki-84 exhibits superior altitude performance compared to earlier models, achieving a service ceiling of 34,450 ft under optimal conditions. Its maximum sustained altitude reaches approximately 32,000 ft when equipped with reduced armament and minimal fuel load. Pilots have reported satisfactory performance up to 28,000 halved, after which there is a significant degradation in power. Although the HAR-45 engine is powerful at medium altitudes, it lacks effective supercharging for extreme heights. Ki-84s have attempted to intercept mining missions where B-29s operate at lower altitudes over water, achieving several victories against bombers flying below 20,000 FT. These successes illustrate the fighter's capabilities when the altitude disadvantage is mitigated. However, higher altitude daylight missions remain largely immune to interception. Despite the improvements made to the Ki-84, the disparity in performance continues to be evident in the remaining combat operations, with the majority of K-84 sorties failing to achieve the necessary engagement altitude. In June 1945, the Kawasaki K100 is introduced, a fighter modified from Ki-61 airframes equipped with radial engines, which replace the problematic liquid-cooled power plants. This modification significantly enhances reliability, although it does result in diminished altitude performance when compared to versions with inline engines. The Kai series excels against American fighters at medium altitudes, demonstrating remarkable maneuverability and earning the favor of pilots. However, the radial engine's limitations in high-altitude performance restrict its ceiling to approximately 32,000 feet. Pilots have reported excellent handling characteristics, yet they find the altitude performance inadequate for intercepting B-29 bombers. The Ki-100 stands as Japan's most effective operational fighter, but it arrives too late and in insufficient quantities. Throughout 1945, the Japanese aircraft industry develops various specialized prototypes for high-altitude interception. The Mitsubishi Ki-83, a twin-engine fighter, promises outstanding altitude performance thanks to its turbo-supercharged engines. Meanwhile, the Kawasaki K102 heavy fighter is designed with formidable armament specifically aimed at destroying bombers. However, development programs are hindered by shortages of materials, particularly high-grade aluminum and special alloys required for superchargers. Manufacturing challenges prevent these aircraft from being operationally deployed before the war concludes, with most prototypes being destroyed in bombing raids. Systematic B-29 attacks devastate aircraft factories and engine plants, effectively eliminating production capabilities. The Akashi engine works, which produces the HAR-40 engine for the Ki-61 fighters, was destroyed by fire in January 1945. The technological divide continues to expand as American advancements outstrip Japanese development efforts, with each passing month introducing improved B-29 capabilities, while the Japanese industry faces collapse. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets spearheads specialized training for atomic bomb delivery. Leveraging the altitude capabilities of the B-29, the silver plate B-29s eliminate all defensive armaments except for tailguns, allowing them to achieve even greater operational altitudes. These alterations guarantee that nuclear delivery aircraft are entirely immune to interception. The date of August 6, 1945 serves as the ultimate showcase of altitude sanctuary. As the Enola Gay approaches Hiroshima at 31,600 feet, Japanese fighters take off from nearby bases but are unable to reach the altitude of the solitary bomber. Lieutenant Matsuo Yasui desperately ascends in his Ki-61. In his attempt to engage the enemy, his fighter reaches 29,000 feet before stalling, still 2,000 feet below the bomber. Other interceptors perform no better, with most failing to surpass 27,000 feet despite optimal weather conditions. The atomic detonation occurs while the fighters circle helplessly below, unable to intervene or even recognize the unique nature of the weapon. A similar failure transpires on August 9th when Boxcar delivers the second atomic bomb over Nagasaki. Japanese radar successfully tracks the bomber throughout its approach, providing sufficient warning for interception efforts. Multiple fighter squadrons are launched but cannot attain the B-29's altitude of 28,000 feet. This technological sanctuary allows for the deployment of strategic weapons without any chance of prevention. Post-war evaluations reveal the comprehensive extent of the Japanese technological disadvantage in relation to B-29 operations. Pressurization technology facilitated sustained operations above the capabilities of Japanese interceptors throughout the campaign. American crews operated efficiently at altitudes where Japanese pilots could barely endure. Engine turbo-supercharging preserved power at altitudes where Japanese engines produced less than half of their rated output. The cumulative advantages proved to be absolutely critical in the effectiveness of strategic bombing. Japanese pilots consistently exhibited remarkable bravery and skill within the mechanical constraints of their aircraft. However, individual resolve could not surmount the fundamental technological disparities in equipment capability. High-altitude combat necessitated engineering solutions that exceeded the industrial capabilities of Japan during wartime. Shortages of materials, especially specialized steels and aluminum alloys, hindered the development of competitive systems. The B-29 campaign confirmed the value of American investments in advanced bomber technology and industrial capacity. The effectiveness of strategic bombing relied on achieving operational sanctuary through altitude superiority, which no level of enemy bravery could counteract. The failures of Japanese defenses highlighted the necessity of matching the technological capabilities of the enemy in modern warfare. This campaign shaped the priorities for military aviation development in the post-war era globally, establishing precedents that remain significant today. General Korichitsa Anami assesses the failures in home defense during the final military conferences prior to surrender. The altitude superiority of the B-29 completely nullified Japan's geographical advantages and fighting spirit. Technical inferiority proved to be an insurmountable challenge despite tactical innovations and the sacrifices made by pilots. The acknowledgement of technological defeat played a crucial role in the military's acceptance of unconditional surrender terms. Without the means to defend against B-29s, any continued resistance became futile. Former K-61 pilot Lieutenant Naoshi Kano recounts desperate attempts at interception in his post-war memoirs. We ascended with all the power our engines could muster, monitoring the temperature gauges as they approached the red zone. My flight leader's engine ignited at 28,000 feet. He ejected while I persisted in climbing, reaching perhaps 30,000 feet before my controls became entirely ineffective. The B-29s flew overhead like silver phantoms, unattainable despite our most fervent efforts. The frustration and humiliation of being unable to defend our homeland plagued us more than the fear of death. B-29 crew member Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson recounts observing Japanese fighters from his central fire control position. We could see them laboring to ascend toward us, tiny dots gradually growing larger. At times, they would approach closely enough for us to observe intricate details such as the red circles on their wings and even the pilot's canopy. Subsequently, they would stall and descend, spiraling down like leaves. A few of them succeeded in firing at us, but their shots typically fell short. It was somewhat disheartening to witness their earnest efforts resulting in failure. We possessed every advantage: altitude, speed, firepower, and armor. They had nothing but bravery, and bravery alone could not withstand the laws of physics. Strategic Air Command integrates the operational lessons learned from the B-29 into the nuclear delivery doctrine of the Cold War. The principle of high-altitude penetration becomes essential for the deployment of strategic bombers against defended targets. The advancements in pressurization and supercharging technology are rapidly based on combat experiences in Japan. The tactical benefits demonstrated against Japanese defenses have influenced decades of bomber development, ultimately leading to the creation of jet-powered strategic bombers that operate at even higher altitudes. The Japanese aviation industry examines B-29 technology through captured aircraft and documentation following their surrender. Engineers identify that multiple technological generations distinguish Japanese aircraft design philosophy from that of the Americans. Pressurization systems include intricate sealing mechanisms and structural reinforcements that exceed the manufacturing capabilities of Japan. Turbo-supercharging exemplifies precision engineering that necessitates special materials and manufacturing tolerances that were not available in wartime Japan. Remote control defensive systems utilize analog computers that are more advanced than any military equipment possessed by Japan, which relied on vacuum tubes and precision components that they could not produce. This technological analysis offers a sobering evaluation of the industrial development requirements necessary for modern aviation competition. Veteran B-29 pilot Colonel Paul Tibbets reflects on the advantage of altitude during atomic missions, noting that flying above the capabilities of enemy fighters allowed for precise navigation to targets without concerns for defense. We understood that Japanese fighters were unable to reach us, which enabled us to concentrate fully on the mission. The technological sanctuary was unequivocally effective. They could observe us and track us via radar, yet they could not harm us. It felt akin to being shielded by bulletproof glass. Their failure to intercept ensured the success of the atomic mission, irrespective of any early warnings or preparations. Captain Iwa Hayashi, a Ki-84 pilot, recounts his attempts to intercept B-29 bombers during the final months of the war. Despite piloting Japan's most advanced fighter, achieving the altitude of the bombers was nearly unfeasible. The engine would stutter and falter above 30,000 feet, barely generating sufficient power to sustain flight. The controls became unresponsive, akin to maneuvering through molasses. If we were fortunate, we would make a single pass, firing a brief burst before stalling, witnessing them continue unharmed while our cities were engulfed in flames, instilled a sense of helplessness that I will never forget. An analysis of the downed B-29s indicates a level of sophisticated construction that far exceeds Japan's manufacturing capabilities. The design of the pressurized compartments includes intricate sealing systems utilizing synthetic rubber compounds that Japan was incapable of producing. The structural reinforcement necessary for pressurization demands precision welding techniques and quality control that surpass Japanese standards. The remote turret control systems utilize analog computers that employ vacuum tube technology, which is more advanced than any military equipment available to Japan. The servo mechanisms for gun control exhibit a level of precision manufacturing that is not found in Japanese industry. Even the most basic components, such as electrical wiring, utilize materials and insulation that are superior to their Japanese counterparts. Major Toshio Sakagawa leads the 244th Sentai during the B-29 offensive, documenting the combat experiences of his unit. My pilots were among the finest in Japan, possessing years of combat experience. Nevertheless, we accomplished virtually nothing against the B-29s at high altitudes. Our combat reports consistently reflect the same shortcomings, desperately climbing, reaching an altitude of perhaps 28,000 or 29,000 feet with engines failing and controls becoming ineffective. We watched helplessly as bombers flew overhead. The technological defeat was both complete and humiliating. B-29 bombardier Lieutenant Marcus McDilder observes the attempts of Japanese fighters during missions over Osaka. The Japanese pilots displayed remarkable determination. We would observe them climbing towards us for 15 to 20 minutes, struggling to ascend higher and higher. Some attempted zoom climbs, sacrificing speed for altitude in their desperate efforts to reach us. They would fire a few rounds, typically falling short, before stalling and spinning away. Our gunners seldom needed to fire. The altitude provided better protection than any armor or weaponry. It was a completely one-sided battle dictated by technology rather than bravery. Reports from the Japanese military attaché in Germany detail the Luftwaffe's difficulties in intercepting high-altitude Allied bombers, offering context for Japan's challenges. Even with superior engines and technology, German fighters encountered obstacles when engaging bombers above 25,000 feet. The Mi-262 jet fighters achieved limited success due to their speed and altitude performance advantages which were not available to Japan. The Japanese industry was unable to develop comparable jet technology before the war's conclusion. Despite acknowledging the necessity, attempts to replicate German designs failed due to a lack of specialized materials and manufacturing expertise. The technological divide proved insurmountable given resource constraints and the strategic bombing damage inflicted on industry. Colonel John Montgomery leads the 9th Bombardment Group missions from Tinian, observing the evolution of Japanese defenses. Initially, they attempted mass interceptions, deploying everything that could fly. By the spring of 1945, they had largely abandoned daylight, high-altitude interceptions, focusing instead on night raids when we approached low within centuries. This was a smart adaptation, but it came too late to have any significant impact. The altitude advantage we maintained for the majority of the campaign allowed us to devastate their industry with little opposition. Maintenance officer Captain Hiroshi Fujiwara records ongoing issues related to Japanese high-altitude fighter operations in his technical reports. Engine failures surged dramatically during attempts to reach maximum altitude. The HAR-40 engine in the Ki-61s would overheat within minutes when operating at full throttle above 25,000 feet. Oil pressure would drop, and coolant would boil despite modifications made to the radiator. Malfunctions in the oxygen system resulted in numerous pilot casualties, with men losing consciousness at high altitudes, some never regaining awareness. Frostbite became prevalent as pilots removed their gloves to operate controls in extreme altitude conditions. The accumulation of mechanical failures rendered sustained high-altitude operations unfeasible, irrespective of the pilot's determination. B-29 Engineer Staff Sergeant James Pearson oversees pressurization systems during combat missions. The cabin altitude remained comfortably at an equivalent of 8,000 feet, while we cruised above 30,000 feet. We worked in our shirt sleeves, moving freely between stations. In contrast, Japanese pilots struggled with frozen controls, insufficient oxygen, and engines that could barely operate. The technological disparity was stark. It was not a fair fight. It was hardly a fight at all. Japanese radar operator Corporal Shigo Yamamoto monitors B-29 formations approaching at unprecedented altitudes. Our equipment could detect them from hundreds of miles away, providing our fighters with ample warning. However, this warning was futile when our planes were unable to reach the bombing altitude. I would direct fighters toward intercept points, fully aware of their impending failure. Pilots would report achieving maximum altitudes, typically around 27,000 or 28,000 feet, only to witness bombers flying overhead at 31,000 feet. The frustration evident in their voices was heartbreaking. We possessed the will, but lacked the means. Final assessments from the Japanese military acknowledge a complete failure in defending against B-29 high-altitude operations. Despite geographic advantages, warrior spirit, and early warning capabilities, technological inferiority hindered effective homeland defense. Limitations in industrial capacity rendered it impossible to match American bomber technology during wartime. The acknowledgement of technological defeat played a significant role in shaping military support for surrender negotiations, recognizing that ongoing resistance could not avert Japan's aerial destruction. On August 14, 1945, Lieutenant Kuniohi Tanaka executed the final interception sortie against a reconnaissance B-29 engaged in damage assessment photography. His notable 100 fighter reached an altitude of 28,000 feet before a loss of engine power necessitated a descent, a scenario typical of numerous unsuccessful interceptions. The photo reconnaissance aircraft continued its mission unchallenged at 35,000 feet, capturing images of atomic bomb damage for American intelligence. This mission epitomizes the persistent technological inadequacy in countering American strategic aviation dominance even in the concluding moments of the war. During these operations, B-29 radio operator Sergeant William Ale monitored Japanese fighter control frequencies, offering insights into the enemy's frustration. We could hear their ground controllers directing fighters towards us, providing altitude and heading details. Subsequently, the pilots would report their inability to ascend any higher due to overheating engines and power loss. At times, one could detect anger, while at other moments, resignation. They were aware of our location and our actions, yet they were powerless to stop us. Technology dictated the outcome. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey undertakes a comprehensive analysis of the effectiveness of Japanese fighters against B-29 operations. High-altitude daylight raids experienced minimal losses from fighter interceptions throughout the campaign. Approximately 50 B-29s were lost to fighters during over 30,000 individual sorties, resulting in a loss rate of less than 0.2%. Japanese fighters demonstrated effectiveness only when B-29s operated at lower altitudes due to mechanical issues or tactical necessities. These statistics confirm the effectiveness of altitude sanctuary against contemporary interceptor technology. In a post-war analysis, former Imperial Japanese Navy Commander Masatake Okumiya assesses the failures of strategic bombing defenses. The altitude capability of the B-29 surpassed our intelligence estimates by a minimum of 5,000 feet. We anticipated maximum operating altitudes to be around 26,000 feet based on the performance of the B-17 and B-24. However, when they consistently operated above 30,000 feet, our entire defensive strategy fell apart. We were short on time, resources, and technology to create effective countermeasures. B-29 pilot Colonel Robert Robbins articulates the psychological advantage of altitude sanctuary. The knowledge that enemy fighters could not reach us altered everything. We flew directly and leveled towards our targets with no need for evasive maneuvers. Bombardiers had stable platforms for precise targeting. Crews remained composed, understanding that the primary threat stemmed from mechanical failures rather than enemy actions. The boost in confidence was substantial. We dominated the skies above 30,000 feet, and everyone was aware of it. Kai 44 veteran Captain Yoshiro Aoki reminisces about observing B-29 contrails that were beyond our reach. Each mission brought the same sense of humiliation. We would ascend until our engines failed, achieving perhaps one-third of the necessary altitude, only to witness silver contrails etching lines across our sky. The traditional warrior spirit held no value against aluminum and engineering. We were like samurai with swords attempting to reach the moon. The psychological effect was more detrimental to morale than combat losses could ever be. General Henry Arnold assesses the success of the B-29 program despite the immense development costs that surpassed those of the Manhattan Project. The strategic bombing campaign justified every dollar spent on advanced technology. The altitude sanctuary facilitated precision strikes and the delivery of atomic weapons without incurring prohibitive losses. We demonstrated that technological superiority could secure victory without extensive ground invasions. The investments in pressurization, supercharging, and defensive systems yielded benefits that influenced military aviation for decades. Japanese aircraft designer Teo Doi examines the significant limitations of the Ki-61 against B-29 operations. Our fighter was optimized for combat at altitudes between 15,000 and 25,000 feet, where most aerial engagements took place. We had never expected bombers to operate routinely at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. Altering existing designs turned out to be unfeasible. The engine, airframe, and systems were fundamentally insufficient for extreme heights. Initiating a new design would necessitate years we did not possess and resources that were no longer available. Squadron leader Major Teruhiko Kobayashi's 244th Centi achieved over 100 victories against American aircraft, yet had limited success against B-29s. My pilots included several aces with extensive experience against fighters and medium bombers. We remained competitive, but B-29s at high altitudes seemed as if they were on another planet. Skill became irrelevant when our aircraft could not physically reach the enemy. We observed our homeland burning while we had the will to defend it, but lacked the means. B-29 navigator Lieutenant Thomas Cartwright outlines the navigation benefits of pressurized operations. Operating at altitude without oxygen masks or heavy gloves allowed for accurate chart work and calculations. We could utilize all our instruments effectively, communicate clearly, and move between stations as necessary. Japanese navigators in unpressurized fighters faced fogged goggles, frozen instruments, and hypoxia that impaired judgment. Our technological advantages enhanced effectiveness in ways that transcended mere altitude. Japanese anti-aircraft artillery commander Colonel Hiroshi Yamamoto records the ineffectiveness of ground-based defenses. Our largest guns could theoretically reach 30,000 feet, but achieving accuracy at that height was nearly impossible. Shell dispersion patterns meant that hitting anything required extraordinary luck. We expended thousands of rounds for each bomber destroyed, depleting our ammunition reserves without achieving significant results. The B-29s operated above the effective range of ground defenses, shielded by altitude as effectively as any armor. Maintenance issues hindered Japanese high-altitude operations throughout the campaign. Engines necessitated complete overhauls after only a few maximum altitude attempts due to excessive stress. Supercharger systems frequently experience failures, and the availability of replacement parts is diminishing. Oxygen systems require ongoing maintenance and are hindered by a shortage of oxygen bottles and calcium hydroxide for CO2 absorption. Mechanical wear and tear diminishes the number of available interceptors, irrespective of combat losses, leading to a decline in operational capability. B-29 tail gunner Sergeant Robert Goldsborough observes the attempts of Japanese fighters from his remote position. From the tail, I had an optimal view of the Japanese fighters attempting to reach us. They would appear as small dots, gradually enlarging as they ascended. Some would fire from a considerable distance, their tracer rounds arcing upward but ultimately falling short. Others would attempt zoom climbs, sacrificing speed for altitude. They would momentarily hover, nearly reaching us before stalling and tumbling away. I seldom fired, as they never approached closely enough to pose a genuine threat. The technological disparity extends beyond mere altitude to encompass all facets of aerial combat. B-29s are equipped with advanced navigation systems, including radar and radio navigation aids that are not available to Japanese forces. Their communication systems facilitate coordinated operations over vast distances, while Japanese radios often malfunction. Even fundamental equipment such as heated flight suits and optical gun sights highlight American industrial dominance. Despite their desperate efforts, Japanese industrial mobilization cannot compete with American production capabilities. The manufacturing of B-29s employs precision techniques and quality control that exceed Japanese capabilities. The assembly line production method achieves economies of scale that are unattainable with Japanese cottage industry practices. America is able to produce nearly 4,000 B-29s, while Japan struggles to manufacture a few hundred inferior fighters, and efforts to duplicate captured equipment are thwarted by limitations in material science. Japan does not have access to the special alloys, synthetic materials, and precision manufacturing tools necessary for advanced aviation technology. The gap in industrial technology appears insurmountable due to the constraints of wartime and the availability of resources. Lieutenant Commander Masahiko Kawamoto directs special attack units targeting B-29 formations over Nagoya. We continuously adjusted our tactics, exploring every conceivable option. Nighttime assaults, dawn interceptions, and coordinated ramming attempts were all employed. However, none yielded consistent results. The B-29s adapted more swiftly than we could, altering their altitudes, routes, and strategies. When we finally devised methods for night interceptions, they reverted to high-altitude daylight raids that were beyond our reach. They maintained every advantage while we were left with only our resolve. Boeing engineers specifically designed the B-29 to meet the strategic bombing needs of the Pacific Theater against Japan. Its extended range allows operations from remote bases that are beyond the reach of enemy interdiction capabilities. The pressurization system facilitates routine operations at altitudes that exceed the performance of enemy interceptors. The defensive systems ensure protection without compromising performance. This design philosophy emphasizes technological superiority over conventional bomber attributes, resulting in a weapon system rather than merely an aircraft. Post-war aviation advancements extensively incorporate lessons learned from B-29 operations. Pressurization has become a standard feature in commercial aviation, directly derived from military technology. Turbo-supercharging allows for routine, high-altitude flight across all types of aircraft. Remote control systems have evolved into the modern fly-by-wire technology. These technological innovations have transformed aviation beyond military uses, laying the groundwork for the contemporary aerospace industry. Captain Kazu Unoda leads the crucial 84 Squadron during the final operations for Homeland Defense. Japan's most advanced fighter aircraft proved ineffective against B-29s operating at high altitudes. Below 25,000 feet, we could engage effectively. However, above that threshold, we were powerless. Pilots returned from missions feeling demoralized, having never had the opportunity to fire a shot. The psychological toll was greater than our losses in aircraft. We understood that we were technologically outmatched, which signified our total defeat. The operations of the B-29 validate the American strategic bombing doctrine by demonstrating technological superiority. The sanctuary provided by altitude allows for the systematic dismantling of Japanese military industrial capacity without incurring excessive losses. The strategic outcomes lead to decisive results without the need for invasion, thereby affirming the theories surrounding air power. The successful delivery of atomic weapons is attributed to the immunity from interception at operational altitudes. This campaign illustrates the effective application of air power through technological superiority rather than sheer numbers, setting precedents for Cold War deterrence strategies. The Japanese military leadership acknowledges the implications of their technological defeat for the continuation of warfare. Their inability to defend against B-29s highlights a broader technological inferiority across all military capabilities. The industrial capacity of Japan cannot compete with American production while enduring continuous strategic bombing damage. This cumulative realization significantly influences Emperor Hirohito's decision to accept unconditional surrender terms, as there were no means to avert the aerial destruction of Japan. Continued resistance is rendered a futile sacrifice. Chief Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, a veteran B-29 crew member, oversees aircraft systems throughout the Pacific campaign. The pressurization equipment, though complex, proved reliable when properly maintained. Turbo-superchargers required meticulous attention, but provided us with power at altitudes where Japanese Android's engines struggled. Each system embodied years of engineering development and industrial capability that Japan simply lacked. Our victory was achieved through technological and industrial strength, not merely through bravery. Former Kai-61 pilot Lieutenant Jiro Tanaka endured multiple unsuccessful attempts to intercept B-29s. Each mission required maximum physical exertion to combat the effects of altitude. Breathing became challenging even with oxygen assistance. His hands became numb from the cold and his eyes watered continuously due to the dry air and low temperatures. The sight of bombers advancing without opposition while our cities were engulfed in flames inflicted psychological trauma that surpassed the stress of combat. We experienced a sense of failure towards our ancestors, our emperor, and our people, not due to a lack of effort, but because of our technological shortcomings. The scale and quality of equipment produced by American industrial mobilization are beyond the comprehension of the Japanese. The B-29 program alone incurs costs that exceed Japan's entire military aviation budget for the duration of the war. Mass production allows for economies of scale that are unattainable by Japanese manufacturing techniques. The use of precision tools and stringent quality control guarantees a level of consistent performance that is not achievable by Japanese industry. This industrial disparity amplifies technological advantages throughout the strategic bombing campaign. General Curtis LeMay's tactical innovations optimize the benefits of the B-29 against Japanese defenses. Low-altitude night raids diminish the altitude advantage, but leverage other technological strengths. Techniques such as radar bombing, incendiary weapons, and mass formations overwhelm Japanese capabilities, irrespective of altitude. The ability to adapt tactics while retaining technological superiority proves to be a decisive factor. Japanese efforts to adapt cannot surmount the inherent disadvantages in equipment and industrial capacity. The B-29 campaign revolutionizes the understanding of how strategic air power can be applied. Technology facilitates effects that previously necessitated large ground forces. In modern warfare, industrial capacity becomes as crucial as military strategy. The precedents set during this time continue to shape military planning through the Cold War and beyond. Strategies for nuclear deterrence are directly informed by the operational experiences of the B-29 over Japan. This thorough analysis of Japanese fighter operations in response to B-29 raids highlights the absolutely critical role of technology in modern warfare. Despite remarkable bravery, tactical ingenuity, and significant sacrifices, Japanese pilots were unable to overcome the fundamental technological constraints they faced. The altitude sanctuary afforded by pressurization and turbo-supercharging established an unassailable advantage. When this was coupled with America's industrial capability for the mass production of intricate weapon systems, the technological divide became insurmountable. The operational superiority of the B-29 over Japan validated American investments in cutting-edge aviation technology, conclusively illustrating that in contemporary warfare, a technological edge can be more critical than the traditional military virtues of bravery, expertise, and resolve. The outcome of the campaign was influenced as much by American factories and engineering offices as by the aerial engagements over Japan, setting precedents that would influence military aviation advancements for generations to come.